Hi, welcome back, guys. We are going to continue How to Train Your Dragons, the first book in a series and also a movie that we've all watched. Well, I haven't. You guys have probably. When we left off, our hero Hiccup came up with a fiendishly clever plan. And everything seemed to be going perfectly fine. It seemed to work. Except there was something just off about everything going on. And all of a sudden, all the dragons started to say, it's time to desert our humans and flee because something big was happening. And Hiccup looked around and the corpse of the big green death was slowly lifting up and turning in their direction. And the chapter ended with Hiccup saying, uh-oh. And that's how it ended. Okay, so we're going to continue and see what happens and how they're going to get it out of this. Chapter 16. The fiendishly clever plan goes wrong. Hiccup had been listening for the Green Death's death song, but he wasn't singing it yet. The Green Death was dying, but he wasn't dead yet. What he was very, very angry indeed. Out of his bleeding mouth, he hissed weakly, "Where is he?" And then he heaved himself onto his feet and hissed a little more strongly, "Where is he? Where is the little supper? I knew I recognized him. He was my doom, no wonder. The little supper has made a supper of me, the Green Death himself." As the dragon spoke, he was inching forward very slowly and painfully, his eyes fixed on the cliff top, where he could see little human beings beginning to run inland again. The dragon threw back his head and screamed a blood-chilling scream of pure horrid revenge, dark and torturous. "I'll supper him before I go, I will," said the dragon, and he leaped forward. "Run!" shouted Hiccup before everybody was already running as fast as they could. In the distance, Hiccup could see 400 warriors from the tribe of hooligans and meatheads coming forward towards them from the highest point. They must have wondered at the boy's absence and come out to find them, but they won't get here in time, thought Hiccup. And even if they do, what can they do? Just then, the dragon landed with a crash on the cliff top, and suddenly the sun was blotted out. 20 boys ran towards the shelter of the ferns. The dragon picked up the nearest one with a claw and turned him over. It was Dog's Breath. By the time the dragon had tossed him aside, muttering, "Not you," the other boys had disappeared into the bracken. The dragon was sick, but he laughed weakly. "You're not safe there. Oh no. For though I can't see you to kill you, I can use my fire." The bracken caught fire with the dragon's first breath, and the boys ran out of it as fast as they could. Hiccup stayed a little longer because he knew the dragon was waiting for him. Finally, the heat became unbearable, and he took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and ran out into the open. He had run hardly 100 yards before two of the dragon's talons closed around his middle and lifted him up, way, way up to the other boys, so the other boys looked like little specks beneath him. The dragon held Hiccup up in front of him. "We are both supper now, little supper," he said, and tossed Hiccup high, high into the air. As Hiccup somersaulted for the second time, he thought to himself, "Now, this really is the worst moment of my life." Then he was falling. He looked down. There was the dragon's mouth, wide open like a great black cavernous tunnel. He was going to fall into it. That was a really short chapter. But kind of scary. So he's barely alive, the big dragon, and he wants to take his revenge on Hiccup for planning this whole thing. And so the boys ran away. Did he catch Hiccup? Yes, he did, which is not good. And when we stopped that chapter, he had thrown Hiccup in the air and was getting ready to eat him. He was falling into his mouth. Chapter 17. In the mouth of the dragon. Hiccup fell into the dragon's mouth, and his teeth snapped shut behind him like prison doors. He was falling through complete darkness, surrounded by a smell so awful it was suffocating. He jerked to a sudden halt as the back of his shirt caught on something and held. Hiccup hung there in the darkness, swaying gently. By 1,000 to 1 chance, his shirt had caught on a spear still stuck in the dragon's throat since his Roman banquet. Hiccup's foot brushed against the wall of what he presumed was the dragon's throat. The dragon's digestive juices stung like acid as he snatched his foot away. Above him, Hiccup could hear the dragon's great tongue lashing and lounging about his mouth, trying to find Hiccup so he could crunch him to death. He hadn't intended to swallow him whole. A disgusting river of green goo dripped down the puffy red insides of the dragon's throat. Just across from where Hiccup was hanging, green yellowy steam was puffing out of 2 small holes in the slimy wall. Every now and then, a small explosion sent a little flicker of flame shooting out of the holes. How interesting, thought Hiccup, who was strangely calm, because he couldn't quite believe that this was really happening. Those must be where the fire comes from. Viking biologists had wondered for years where the fire that dragons breathed came from. Some said the lungs, others the stomach. Hiccup was the first to discover the fire holes, which are too small to see with the naked eye in a normal-sized dragon. Way down below, Hiccup could hear the distant rumbling of singing from the dragon's previous meals. A sea dragonus giganticus obviously takes a long time to digest, though Hiccup, it was indeed still going strong. Humans can be bland, but if you have some salt to hand, a little bit of brine will make them taste divine. The spear was gradually bending over with Hiccup's weight. It was only a matter of time before it broke, and he fell to join the breezy optimist in the stomach below. What was worse, the fumes and the heat and the smell and were starting to confuse Hiccup so that he no longer really cared. The terrible noise of the dragon's heart beating had entered into Hiccup's chest and forced his own heart to follow the same rhythm. A dragon has to live after all, he found himself thinking. And then he remembered the dragon's words to him as he stood on this cliff top. You'll find that you come round to my point of view once you're inside me. Oh no, thought Hiccup, the dragon's digestion. It's already working. I need to live, he repeated to himself over and over again, trying desperately to block out the dragon's thoughts. There was a horrible creaking noise as the stout Roman spear began to split in 2. Alright, so, once again, we ended the chapter in a really, really weird spot, didn't we? Hiccup somehow did not die when he got thrown into the dragon's mouth. Instead, in his throat, he got caught by a spear from when the dragon ate a bunch of people before. But he wasn't really scared because he was shocked. But he took the time to learn about the dragon a little bit more, like the fact that they use fire holes for their fire. But it didn't last very long of his little being happy and just kind of sitting there. Because what happened? Right, the spear broke and he kind of almost came crashing down. Oops. All right, let's go on to chapter 18. The extraordinary bravery of Toothless. And that would have been the end of Hiccup if it had not been for the extraordinary bravery of a certain Toothless daydream. Toothless, if you remember, had refused to join the battle at Death Headland. He was intending to fly off somewhere down the coast a bit and lie low till all was safe again, but he stayed at the highest point for a while, terrorizing birds and rabbits. He must have been having a lovely time doing this, for he did not hear the approach of Stoic and the entire tribes of hooligans and meatheads where Stoic grabbed him around the neck. "Where is my son?" asked Stoic. Toothless shrugged his shoulders rudely. "Where is my son?" bawled Stoic with an awe-inspiring yell, so loud that Toothless' ears trembled. Toothless pointed to Death Headland. "Show me," said Stoic grimly. Under Stoic's fierce eye, Toothless reluctantly flapped off towards Death Headland, followed by the 2 tribes. They arrived just in time to see the terrible monster throw Hiccup high in the air and catch him in his mouth like a whelk. So much for the fiendishly clever plan, thought Toothless. He was about to use the opportunity of Stoic's obvious distraction to sneak off to a place of safety when something stopped him. Nobody knows what that something was. It was a moment that changed the whole worldview of the hooligan tribe. For centuries, we had believed it was impossible for dragons to consider it a selfless thought or a generous action. But what Toothless did next is impossible to explain, as being in his own best interest at the time. All his fellow domestic dragons were now flying somewhere over the inner ocean. As soon as they heard Fireworm's cry of desert, those who were hiding in the caves or between crevices or crouched in the ferns rose up in a great swarm and abandoned their former masters as fast as their wings could carry them. The wild dragons from Wild Dragon Cleef had left hours before, but something kept Toothless from flying after them. No, it was Stoic's heart-rendingly powerless cry of no that caused him to pause, or maybe somewhere in that self-centered green dragon heart of his, he really was fond of Hiccup, and grateful for the hours that he had spent looking after him, not shouting at him, telling him jokes, or giving him the biggest and juiciest lobsters. Dragons are selfish, argued Toothless to himself. Dragons are heartless and have no mercy. That's what makes us survivors. Nonetheless, something made him turn right around, and something made him fold his wings back and fly like a dragon blur to the great monster on the cliff tops, which really was not in Toothless' best interest, as I said before. Toothless flew right up to the monster's left nostril and started flying up and down inside of his nose, tickling it with his wings. The dragon lunged up and down, wrinkling his nose like crazy and bellowing, "Ah!" The creature stuck a great talon up to his nose in a disgusting fashion and tried to winkle out the tickling flea that was irritating him. Toothless didn't quite get out of the way of the talon in time, and it scratched him on the chest. He hardly felt it, though. He was so excited and carried on tickling regardless, dodging the probing dragon's claw. "Ah!" bellowed the sea dragon. Meanwhile, Hiccup was being thrown this way and that inside the dragon's throat as it shook its head from side to side. He was trying desperately to hang on to the spear, which was now in danger of becoming dislodged any second. Choo! The dragon finally sneezed, and Hiccup, the spear, Toothless, and a great deal of perfectly revolting snot were scattered over the surrounding countryside. Toothless remembered as he was shooting through the air, the boys can't fly. He folded his wings and dived after Hiccup, who was rapidly heading towards the ground. Toothless grabbed hold of Hiccup by the arm and tried to take his weight. Dragon talons are extraordinarily strong, and he was able to break Hiccup's fall. Not entirely, but enough so that when Hiccup crashed into the heather, he was traveling reasonably slow. Stoic came plunging frantically through the grass. He picked up his son and faced the monster holding his shield over Hiccup's unconscious body. Toothless hid behind Stoic. The Green Death had recovered from his sneezing fit. He shuffled forward, bleeding horribly from a fatal wound to his chest and throat. He lowered his terrible head till it was on level with the cliff top, and his evil yellow eyes looked straight at Stoic. "Time to die for all of us," purred the Green Death. "You can't save his life now. You know, you are quite helpless. My fire will melt that shield like butter." The Green Death opened his mouth. He slowly sucked in the breath. Stoic grabbed onto the chunk of heather to hold them fast, but Stoic and Hiccup and Toothless were being dragged slowly but surely towards the gigantic black tunnel that was the monster's open jaws. The Green Death paused for a moment before he flew out again, enjoying their terror. "This is what happens if you don't listen to the dragon law," shrieked Toothless to himself in horror as he peered around the side of Stoic's cloak. The monster puffed out his cheek, and Stoic and Toothless waited for flames to consume them, but no fire came out. The Green Death looked very surprised. He puffed out his cheek and blew a little harder. Again, no fire. He tried once more, and now his head seemed to be turning a strange purplish color with the effort of blowing, and it seemed to be swelling bigger and bigger as if he was being pumped up with air from inside. The monster had no idea what was happening. He thrashed around wildly. His eyes bulged larger and larger until, with a bang that could be heard from hundreds of miles in every direction, the Green Death blew up right in front of their eyes. This may seem like a sort of miracle or an intervention on the part of the gods, but in fact there is a logical explanation. When Hiccup was hanging in the sea dragon's throat, he desperately repeating, I need to live, to himself, he had taken off his helmet and plugged the horns as hard as he could into the fire holes. It was a perfect fit. So when the dragon tried to use its fire, the blockage caused a build up of pressure that eventually grew so great that the Green Death simply exploded. Now there were pieces of dragon flying in all directions. Stoic and Toothless were incredibly lucky not to get hit by anything, standing as close to the explosion as they were. But a single burning dragon tooth, 8 foot long, one of the monster's smaller one, exploded straight towards Hiccup. The boy had been dragged from under the shelter of the Stoic shield by the intake of the monster's breath, and now was laying on the ground a couple of feet in front of Stoic and Toothless, completely exposed. Stoic caught the movement of the tooth out of the corner of his eye, flung himself and his shield forward. Only a Viking could have gotten there in time. Shooting woodcock with a bow and arrow develops very quick reflexes, so Stoic's shield did save Hiccup's life after all. And it had not been there, the tooth would have impaled Hiccup like a prawn on a stick. And it buried itself deep into the bronze center of the shield and quivered there, blazing with green-edged dragon flames. Stoic lifted the shield, terrified that the tooth might have pierced through to his son, but Hiccup was unharmed. His eyes were open, and he was listening for something. He was listening for a strange sound that seemed to be coming from the flaming tooth itself. It was the sound of wheezy, echoing singing like that, wind blowing through coral caves, and it went something like this. I tell the mighty big blue whale that his life is over soon. With one swish of his armored tail, I put out the sun and the moon. The winds and gales are quivering when I begin to roar. The waves themselves are shivering and trembling back to shore. Listen, said Hiccup happily just before he passed out. The supper is singing. All right, so that is the end of that chapter. So Toothless saved the day, which is a very non-dragon-like thing to do because, as he says, dragons are selfish, and he wasn't being selfish. Seems weird, right? So, but there's still more, so there's something else must be happening here. Let's go on to the next chapter, called Chapter 19, Hiccup the Useful. 400 Vikings that were now gathered on the cliff tops broke into a wild cheering for Hiccup and Toothless. There was a strange, barbaric sight, all covered in disgusting green dragon snot and slime, but beaming and shouting with the wild delight of those that they had been saved from certain death. All around them, the terrible fight that had just taken place devastated the landscape. A choking green-gray smoke was hanging around and making it difficult to see, but great chunks of Death Headland appeared to have been torn out by the fight. Avalanches of rocks were piled up on the beach. The terrible mountainous corpse of a purple death lay in a deeper water. Bits of the green death's insides and bones were scattered all over the place, while large sections of the heather and ferns were still in flames. However, by some extraordinary miracle, nearly all of the Vikings and their dragons had survived the dreadful battle. I say nearly all because when Toothless crept forward to lick the face of his master with a flickering forked tongue, Stoic noticed a ghastly wound on the little dragon's chest, which was pouring with bright green blood. The talon of the Green Death had pierced the very heart of the supposedly heartless little dragon. Toothless followed Stoic's gaze and looked down for the first time. He let out a squeal of terror and fainted dead away. 2 days later, Hiccup woke up aching all over and very, very hungry. It was late at night. He was laying in Stoic's great bed. The room seemed to be crowded with a great deal of people. Stoic was there, and Valarama, and Old Wrinkly, and Fishlegs, and most of the elders of the tribe. There were dragons there too. Newt's Breath and Hook's Fang snapping and biting around Stoic's legs. Horror Cow perched on the end of Hiccup's bed. The dragon had flown back as soon as they heard the explosion and realized the Master of Berk were masters once more. Being dragons, they had given no explanation for their disappearance, but they did have the grace to look a little sheepish. He's alive, shouted Stoic in triumph, and everybody began to cheer. Valarama gave Hiccup a rousing punch on the shoulder, which is the Viking mother equivalent of really big hug. We're all here, said Valarama, willing you to wake up. Hiccup sat straight up in bed, suddenly very awake. But you're not all here, he said. Where's Toothless? Everybody looked shifty, and nobody would look at Hiccup. Stoic cleared his throat awkwardly. I'm sorry, son, said Stoic. But he did He didn't make it. He died just a few hours ago. The rest of the tribe gave him a hero's funeral at this very moment. It's a great honor, Stoic continued hurriedly. He'll be the first dragon ever to give a proper Viking burial. How did you know he was dead? Hiccup demanded. Stoic looked surprised. Well, you know, the usual. No pulse, no breath, stone cold to the touch. He was quite clearly dead, I'm afraid. Oh, honestly, father, said Hiccup in a frenzy of exasperation. Don't you know anything about dragons? That could have been a sleep coma. It's a good sign. Probably means he's healing himself. Oh, Thor's whisker, said Fishleg. They started the funeral half an hour ago. We've got to stop him, yelled Hiccup. Dragons are only fairly fireproof. They'll burn him alive. Hiccup leaped out of bed with amazing energy, and under the circumstances, he ran out of the room and out of the house and followed closely by Fishlegs and Horror Cow. Down at the Hooligans Harbor, the awesome ceremony of the Viking military funeral was nearly coming to an end. It was an incredible sight if Hiccup had been in the mood for it. The sky was crammed with stars, the sea was glass flat. The entire tribe of hooligans, the entire tribes of hooligans and meatheads were gathered motionless on the rocks, and every single person was carrying a lighted torch in one hand. Even Snotlout was there, trying to look solemn, with his helmet off his head out of respect and his hair neatly brushed. Good riddance to the newt with wings, he was whispering slyly to Dog's Breath, the dub rang, and Dog's Breath snickered. Serves him right for breaking the law, sneered Firearm to Sea Slug, who was picking his nose on Dog's Breath's shoulder. A replica of a Viking ship had been put out to sea and was drifting slightly away from the island of Berk along with the path of the moon's reflection past the weird shape of Stoic and Mogadon's burned-out fleet. Hiccup could see the small body of Toothless laid out in the boat. Beside him lay Stoic's shield, the dragon's tooth still stuck in it like a gigantic alien sword. Goober the Belch sounded a mournful signal of his horn. He was now completely recovered after his unexpected flight. Prrrp. 26 of Stoic's finest archers, standing attention at the right of the harbor, lifted their bows into the air. Every bow was loaded with an arrow in flame. No, shouted Hiccup with the best yell he could ever yell, but it was too late. The flaming arrows soared gracefully through the air. They landed on the ship and set it alight. Some of the crowd on the shore turned to look upwards, wondering who dared to disturb this most solemn ritual. Hiccup, shouted Thuggery, the meathead, joyfully recognizing the figure on the horizon. There was a murmur of wonder from the crowd as they whispered, Hiccup, to each other, and then shouted and cheered and called out his name louder and louder. Snotlout's jaw dropped open. He looked thoroughly disappointed to see Hiccup very much alive and well. Snotlout could just about take Hiccup as a dead hero, but a living Hiccup, the hero, was going to be very much in the way. Hiccup was watching the burning ships, tears pouring down his face. The boat tipped and Stoic's shield and the tooth fell into the water. Just as the last piece of the boat was about to slip beneath the waves to be consumed by the fire and water, the flames reared up about 20 feet into the sky, and, shooting out of those flames, wings spread like a phoenix, trailing fire from his tail like a comet, came Toothless. He soared high, high, high into the stars, leaving a path of flame as he flew. He dived down, down towards the sea, and swooped up at the last minute to cries of wonder from the spectators. Hiccup was anxious that he might be in pain until Toothless zoomed low enough over his head for Hiccup to hear the little dragon rooster's cry of triumph. Whatever Toothless' faults may have been, you have to admire his sense of occasion. Common or garden dragons are not normally known for their spectacular flying skills, but even a common or garden dragon on fire is a spectacle in itself. Toothless burned through the night sky like a live firework, performing screaming fiery somersaults and flaming loop-de-loops. The crowd, who only a moment before were expecting to mourn the death of both Toothless and possibly Hiccup, were now beside themselves, hysterically cheering as Toothless showered them with sparks. At last the fire got too hot for him, and Toothless plunged into the sea to extinguish himself, only to burst out again and fly straight to Hiccup's shoulder. There he acknowledged a wild applause and with solemn bows to right and left, slightly spoiling his dignity with an odd cock-a-doodle-doo of smug self-gratulations. Stoic signaled to the crowd for silence, but only he could boom out the following speech at full blast. Hooligans and meatheads, terror of the seas, sons of Thor and most feared masters of the dragon, I feel humbled to present you with the most recent member of the hooligan tribe. I give you my son, Hiccup the Useful. And the words Hiccup the Useful came echoing down from the hills behind and were shouted back again by the cheering crowd who were picked up and carried on the night breeze until the whole world seemed to be telling Hiccup that maybe he was going to be useful after all. And that, my friends, that is the hard way to become a hero. So, Hiccup is now useful and he is a hero. And they told us that the dragon was dead, but he wasn't. He was just coma asleep. I would say that was the end of the story. It was the end of the story, but we have an epilogue, which means a little add-on thing to tell us something. So looks like there's a letter here. It says, to the Isla Burke Dark Ages, dear Professor Yobish, I am writing to complain most strongly about your book, How to Train Your Dragons. Have you ever tried yelling at one of these sea monster dragons yourself? Come to Burke and I will show you what I mean. Yours not very truly, Stoic the Vast. Epilogue by the author, Hiccup Horrendous Haddock III, the last of the great Viking heroes. The story doesn't end there, of course. The 19 boys who entered initiation with me those many years ago were all allowed into the hooligan and meathead tribe as a result of their heroic actions in defeating 2 sea dragons, Giganticus Maximus, in one day. The battle at Death's Head Headlands had passed into Viking legend and will be sung about by the bards while there are still bards to sing. Of course, there are very few bards left nowadays. What is more, nobody has seen a sea dragoness Giganticus Maximus since, and people are already starting to disbelieve that such a creature could have lived. Learned articles have been written and suggesting that something that large simply could not have sustained its own weight. The dragons that would be my evidence have crawled back into the sea where men cannot follow, and what with heroism being so unfashionable nowadays, nobody's going to believe the mere word of a hero like myself. But the thing about dragons, and I am a person who knows about dragons, is that it could very well be that they are merely slipping down there in the sleeping. Sorry, wow. Try it again. Could very well be that they are merely sleeping down there in the black depths. There could be numberless numbers of them, all frozen in a sleep coma, with the unknowing fishes swimming in and out of their tentacles and hiding in their talons and laying eggs in their ears. There may yet come a time when heroes are needed once more. There may yet come a time when the dragons will come back. When that time comes, men will need to know something about how to train them and how to fight them. And I hope that this book will be more helpful to the heroes of the future than a certain book of the same name was to me all those many years ago. It is easy to forget that there were such things as these monsters. I forget myself sometimes, but then I look up as I am looking up now, and I see in my mind's eye a shield, strangely changed by the rich encrusting of jewel-like barnacles and cold water coral, with an 8-foot tooth sticking right out of the middle of it. I reach out, and the edge of the tooth is still so bitingly sharp that after all these years, that just a single brush with the fingers might send a rain of blood down on these pages. And I bend my head too close, and I'm not sure I can just hear very, very faintly. Once I set the sea alight with a single fiery breath. Once I was so mighty that I thought my name was Death. Sing out loud until you're eaten some of my song of melancholy bliss. For the mighty and the middling, all shall come to this. The supper was singing. The end. So, we finished it. Hiccup's a hero. This was the book that he was written, so he kind of wrote this, as he said in the little epilogue part, because the other book with the same name, as we already know, because we all read it, was horrible. And this one will hopefully be more useful to people when the dragons come back. Now, they say we haven't seen dragons, and so most of us don't believe in them because They haven't came back yet, but they can at any point in time. So, but now we're all smarter, so we can train a dragon. I hope you enjoyed this book. I'll come back again with another set of videos with another book soon. Thanks.